it's your girl Aaron, and welcome to another episode of Left Tube Tonight, the show where sub-counts don't matter, the liberation of the working class does. And I've got some videos to share with you today, so if you're a leftist, I think you're going to find this interesting. And there are so many great creators out there, so I just wanted to share some of what other people are making. But I haven't done an episode in a while, so there's going to be a whole lot to go through. Before I get started with videos that I want to recommend to you, I wanted to share with you a map that I made with some help of some of my friends. And the idea behind this map is to try and guess how fascist certain regions are. So yes, it's completely subjective and there's no scientific process behind this, but I just wanted to try and get a rough estimate based on like news articles and things I could find online about what the state of the world is today. And as you can see, we don't really have anything resembling socialism on a large scale. There's a few social democracies, and the rest is either neoliberal or more fascist from there. And so I'll update this map from time to time as I come aware of different things changing and let you know. For example, the USA might change color between now and the next episode, considering that you've got your midterms, and I don't see the balance of power staying where it is. It's probably either going to go one way or the other. But then getting to the videos that I had recommended for you today, starting with gender. And the first video that I wanted to recommend is the video by Philosophy Tube called Witchcraft, Gender and Marxism. And this was the first time that it sort of occurred to me that the same thing happens with queerphobes who will often kill random trans people. They want to avoid losing their monopoly on privilege. And to be honest, lynchings still continue in the USA, even in their traditional form. So I think it's quite a relevant topic, and I can't really do this video justice. There's a lot of depth to it, so go have a look. Next, I wanted to share a video by Riley J. Dennis called Do Trans People Need to Pass? And I found it to be really insightful and informative. The idea of passing, for better or worse, is something that's going to have to be discussed a bit more in the community as it's sort of unresolved. But Riley does a great job of explaining why people might want to pass and what kinds of problems people face when they don't pass, as well as like what it is, etc. And then Barcroft TV released a video interviewing some trans children and their parents, and it was pretty wholesome for me to see kids whose parents had let them transition and for them to have like a relatively normal life compared to what some of us had to experience. And it's really cool to see trans people being normalized so people can see that we're not freaks or anything like that. Then moving on to the Halloween theme, Flea Market Socialists released a video of an anti-capitalist art installation that they installed, and there was a really awesome statement made in the video that was, art changes society faster than politics. And so yeah, that was a pretty awesome art piece, I think. Go check out that video. And then NonCompete uploaded a video that was made in collaboration with a whole bunch of other spooky, scary socialists, and it was really awesome tribute to socialism with the Halloween aesthetic, so I don't think you want to miss that. And then while we're talking about NonCompete, you might also be interested in the video that they made called Exploiting the Working Class in City Skylines, where they play through building up the city from scratch and discussing how capitalist development leads to worker alienation and marginalization. And I found the analogy to be quite profound. It helps you to understand things like gentrification, for example, better. And then Thoughtsline did a BuzzFeed-style list of the top 5 anti-capitalist horror movies. You'll never guess who made it to number 1. So if you like horror movies or hate capitalism, both, this is a great video for you. And then staying with Thoughtsline for a bit, moving on to the anti-authoritarianism segment, Thoughtsline uploaded a video called All Cops Are Bad, where they talk about just that and explain why. And if you think police are not bad, then you really need to watch this video. Thoughtsline explains why you can't just fire all the current cops and hire more chill ones, but that it's an institutional problem. And then there was a joke that Thoughtsline made where they said that they were anticipating that the video was going to be played back to them in court one day. Well, if you've had similar kinds of fears, then you might enjoy watching the movie by Coffee Break called why cops beat you in the interrogation room, and discusses how the police attempt to manipulate you in interrogation rooms, and that those interrogations look nothing like what we see in the movies. Often they are actually quite boring, and there's a whole lot of psychological traps that we fall into when we're bored. Next, Jimmy Dore spoke about how New Zealand has just ratified the TPP, despite mass protests against it by the New Zealand people. If you don't know what the TPP is, it is a trade deal with some Pacific countries. The USA pulled out of it, but there are still a whole bunch of countries who are going ahead with it. And what it does is it makes their nations subservient to a international tribunal run by mega corporations, etc., which will be able to sue those nations if they do anything to hinder the profits of those corporations. And so it's basically putting the nations beneath the corporations in the legislative hierarchy. And New Zealand voted 111 to 8 in favour of that, despite about 94% of the New Zealand public being against it in recent polls. And so that just goes to show you that fascism is a global phenomenon, in my opinion, and that New Zealand, which used to be blue on my map when I started making it, and then when I heard about this, I had to change it to make it like green and slightly closer to yellow, because it is clearly going down the neoliberal path. Then the Juice Media released another honest government ad talking about Australia's imperialist exploitation of the Timor-Leste nation. And the whistleblower who broke this is not being protected legally, while Australia is using their anti-terrorism spy network for corporate espionage instead of anti-terrorism. So yeah, Australia is really trying to follow in the footsteps of other imperialist states. And talking about whistleblowers, they make a very important part of the practice in the next video I'd like to recommend. And that's the video called How to Build an Authoritarian Regime and How to Stop One by Timothy Snyder. Timothy talks about how there was an extremely violent period of history following the invention of the printing press, and that the so-called Enlightenment only took place about 150 years later. And they compare that to how the internet is a disruptive form of communication, which hasn't yet been able to enlighten our society. And so that technology is still being used by bad actors who are trying to reduce the amounts of facts in the world instead of increase them. Authoritarians are great fans of using fake news and fire hosing because this dilutes the factualness of the information in society. And when the truth is less discernible, then it's easier for them to be manipulated into believing the things that make them feel good, things that the authoritarians have designed to feel good while furthering their interests. And so very interesting to me was that they mentioned that the way that you can actually fight back against authoritarianism is to re-establish factuality in society. But that's going to take a grassroots journalistic movement where we produce facts. We actually go out and record the things that are happening and create our own news networks and stuff that aren't under corporate or government control, so that we can actually know what is or isn't true. So I found that was really interesting, and I think it's worth a watch. For an example of where the dissolution of facts is being used by the right wing, we have a crisis in Brazil, where a fascist leader was democratically elected. Tese Onze gives a great introduction to what is going on there. Their newly elected President Bolsonaro has been open about wanting to return to a military dictatorship, and a lot of his supporters are completely fine with that. And they have said that they want to send the military into poorer neighborhoods and shoot anyone who looks dodgy to try and reduce crime. Bolsonaro said something like, maybe the solution to Brazil is a civil war where they can kill 30,000 people. So I don't think for a second that that number is out of the ballpark, considering that in the Philippines, where similar extrajudicial killings were given the go-ahead by the president there, they've seen about 20,000 people shot. And people have murdered in the name of Bolsonaro, and all he said in response to that was, well, I can't control what everyone else does. So, yeah. And if you don't know yet, Steve Bannon was involved in his fake news campaign. So that's something we need to watch out for. Maria the Witch uploaded some videos from Brazil covering the protest before and after the election. it's really encouraging to see that there is a bit of a resistance and anti-fascist culture there. They have been under a military dictatorship before, so hopefully they can find the means to throw off that fascism again, and hopefully some of that knowledge of how to resist is still there. I've come across a really good anarchist organization from Brazil called Coordenação Anarquista Brasileira. So I'll put a link in the description to some of that theory if you're interested. Then moving on, Redfish uploaded a video from Brazil of the police beating a protester unconscious. It's pretty scary stuff, but it's good that these incidents are getting documented so we have some chance of bringing justice in the future. Now to move on to the USA, and you'll have your midterm elections coming up, so this is going to be a lot of pro-voting stuff because I honestly think that there is some value to voting in this particular case. So now voting is a super controversial thing, especially for an anarchist, and yes, I do think that it is kind of inherently unethical, but it is also what we have to deal with sometimes because the consequences of not participating can be worse than making those ethical compromises. For example, something like what's happened in Brazil might have been avoided if there was more voting, and while that shouldn't be the tactic that you use to try and gain victory, when you have a choice to vote or not, just vote and maybe it won't happen. So another thing that's unethical but that people sometimes still do is consume under capitalism, because the results of not doing that are kind of not desirable. You could even die. And so you could die if fascists gain control, and maybe there are some kind of ethical compromises that could potentially have a chance at stopping that from happening that you might want to do. It's not how you're going to stop it permanently or fix it, but it might save a bunch of people's lives if you can keep horrible people out of power somehow. So then first up on the videos about the USA is Peter Coffin's video, Voting Isn't Enough, but it also doesn't hurt. And they talk about the problems with the voting system and politicians, and that what we need isn't better politicians, but more movements. And that you have to start with where you are now and build out from there, and that voting can be a way of building solidarity with the people who you want to build those movements with. Then AJ Plus did a video about the Democratic Socialists of America, who are a third party in America trying to build a movement there, and they have actual closer to the left policy, unlike the Democratic Party, which is very right-wing, just not far right like the Republicans. So when it comes to voting, you need to decide what's best. Maybe it's a third party, maybe not, but keep in mind that voting is really just a harm reduction thing. It is not a way to achieve actual liberation. Then Owen Jones spoke to Slavoj Zizek about politics, and Zizek talks about how you get Trumps as a reaction to the neoliberal policies that harmed the working class before Trump, and how the fascists end up having a more attractive economic policy than the standard neoliberals, simply because the neoliberals are not actually doing anything to help the people. Also talking about how left populism like in the Democratic Party, is almost always filled with platitudes and not any actual plan of this is how we're going to fix things. And when people don't see a plan like that, they are much less likely to believe that you are going to be able to do what you say. And so it's that distrust in the alternative that can cause some people to vote for the ones that are actually worse for them. And then I wanted to comment on Hank Green's video about rigged elections on the Vlogbrothers channel, talking about how Trump's lies weaken democracy because he's priming his base for rejecting the results of the elections, which is a clear sign that he might intend to stay in power if he loses an election. And so I think it's kind of interesting that Hank is having these sort of more left-leaning ideas. Then Vox covers the topic from a different angle, and they cover the asymmetric ideological change between the two parties in the USA, how the Republicans have gone further and further right, while the Democrats have stayed exactly where they are. And to put that into context of what Zizek was saying, basically, while the center has stayed where it has failed to offer reprieve from the suffering that people have. There's been no efforts to improve the working class people's lives. And so if they had moved further left, then they would have offered that solution and people wouldn't have been susceptible to the Republicans going further and further right. That's an interesting theory to think about. Then Bay of the fifth column discussed how the rhetoric Trump uses and the cutting off of aid to countries who have asylum seekers indicates pretty clearly that he thinks it is a nation's job to keep people within its borders, and talked about how the militarization of the southern border, which they say is meant to keep people out, could just as easily actually be used to keep people in. And if things keep going the way they are, I can foresee millions of people in the USA in danger for their lives who might want to flee, and this is kind of really not cool. The Majority Report with Sam Cedar covers the Washington State Representative Matt Shear's manifesto for a right-wing Christian civil war, where all non-Christian males would be killed and abortion would be outlawed. So if you thought something like The Handmaid's Tale was fiction, there's literally people who are writing manifestos to try and bring that kind of society to pass. Democracy Now! Covers some of the white supremacist terror attacks that have gone on recently, like the Pittsburgh attack, and how conspiracy theories fuel these kinds of violent attacks. The Pittsburgh shooter wasn't just an anti-Semite, but was also radicalized as a white supremacist, and believed that there was a plot against the white race. Step Back History talked about the birthright citizenship issue, and how it's pretty concerning because the constitutional amendment where birthright citizenship was granted was the 14th Amendment, I think it was, which was one of the post-slavery amendments that was meant to give civil rights to black people. So if they're going to be modifying that amendment for something seemingly non-severe, then it might be an indication that they want to modify it further. So if after all that you are still interested in voting, Philip DeFranco covers some of the important elections. And then moving on, Philip DeFranco also talks about Yemen, and things are really not cool there. I understand Philip DeFranco is a centrist capitalist, but he does sometimes care about justice, and this was pretty good coverage of the situation there. Then the Peace Report also talks about the war in Yemen and the USA's complicity. Many of the terrorist strikes by Saudi Arabia on Yemeni civilians have used bombs made in the USA. So you know the money the Republicans didn't want to lose by responding to Khashoggi's murder by Saudi Arabia? Yeah, that's like arms money. They literally want to keep selling bombs, and they don't want to stop selling bombs that are killing innocent civilians. They'd rather not do anything about Khashoggi because they want to keep helping civilians die. Saudi Arabia has been attacking school buses, funerals, weddings, hospitals, and the USA knows all that and still wants to keep selling them arms. Then Kimberly Crenshaw gave a TED talk about the urgency of intersectionality. Kimberly explains how society is lacking an understanding of how multiple forms of oppression compound each other, sometimes because people don't understand how these oppressions manifest together, and they don't recognize when someone is being oppressed. For example, a certain employer might hire African American and hire women, but never hire African American women. Kimberly Crenshaw really points out how that understanding needs to come to society of how these things compound each other if we want to tell the full story of the suffering and oppression that they are being subjected to. Then Jack Sane talks about the NPC meme and how it's problematic and used by the right as a way of dissociating themselves from people who disagree with them, as well as to kind of dehumanize their political opponents. And yes, the Fash are using those memes to try and radicalize alt-right type people. So that is not cool. Probably don't want to use that meme. Then Peter Coffin and Ashley talked about cultural appropriation and spectacle, and how defining cultural appropriation as simply being a case of intellectual property and offense or copying massively misses what appropriation actually is, and that argument itself is an attempt to commodify culture, but rather cultural appropriation is part of the mechanisms of subjugation of other cultures under the appropriating class. Sean talks about how PragerU lies to you. You might have seen their videos promoted on YouTube because they spend a lot on advertising, PragerU that is, but they're literally just right-wing propaganda channel portraying itself as an online university. So check out Sean's video for a breakdown on the kinds of lies they push. Then 3 Arrows talks about how to fall down the anti-SJW rabbit hole and how or why people fall for those arguments. The thing is that those people offer a sense of community, and they give people a picture of the world that is simple and easy to understand, even though it is not that correct. And as 3 Arrows says, you come for the laughs and entertainment, but what sticks in your head isn't necessarily a pro-right agenda, but an anti-left one. And so the dangers of being convinced to be anti-left is you haven't got much defense against right-wing arguments, which the left would be able to counter. Then Mamadou Dore talks about how having a lot of power affects your brain. Research has found that increased control and authority over others activates a dopamine release, so people in power can literally get addicted to power. But apart from the dopamine, what's more concerning is the symptom that power suppresses your ability to mirror others. That means people with a lot of power have literally less ability to feel what other people feel or imagine what it's like to walk in their shoes. And this might explain why they don't care about anyone when they get into power. And Mamadou also released a video about how our brains respond to people who aren't like us. For example, how people perceive those in their in-group more positively than those in their out-group. And our brains like to make these shortcuts and generalizations according to sort of people groups. But to counter this, we need to focus on people as individuals and to stop spreading misinformation about people groups. Fact check everything you say before you share it. And then lastly, I wanted to share a video by Dr. Mike called Emotions Cause Physical Pain. And I found this pretty interesting because I'm kind of sure that this is a symptom I've been having my whole life, and I've just never heard anyone talking about it before. So yeah, your brain can literally shut off blood to certain parts of your body so that it hurts and that helps you dissociate from your anxieties. And yeah, it's really amazing what brains can do, but sometimes it's uncomfortable. But that's all for today. Hopefully you found this helpful, found some things to watch. If you liked it, feel free to share it with everyone in the world. Stay subscribed if you want to catch future episodes as well as other videos I have planned. And thank you for watching. Bye.